Unaware, the cafe owner kicks a very old black woman. Elon Musk is watching. Where are you viewing from? Please let us know in the comments. For more motivational stories, remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can also help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we don't miss the end. The narrative: it was a typical Brooklyn, New York, and harbor-bruising morning. Richard Grayson, the cafe's owner and a man in his late 40s, abruptly raised his voice at an older black woman, breaking the quiet hum of discussion in a busy cafe noted for its artisanal coffee and comfortable atmosphere. He yelled and pointed at the door, saying, "I told you already that you can't sit here without buying anything." Little did he know that the man sitting peacefully in the corner, enjoying an espresso, was none other than Elon Musk, the tech tycoon and millionaire, who was listening to everything the woman said. Eleanor Davis, 72, was not just ordinary customer, she was there on a very personal mission. Her hands were shaking slightly as she gripped her old, tattered handbag. Eleanor had been going to Harbor Bruce for years. It was the place where she had met her late husband Benjamin during the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Every year on December 16th, their wedding anniversary, she would sit at the same table by the window and think back on their love story and the life they had created together before Benjamin's death 3 years ago this year. However, things had changed. She had saved every penny to come here despite rising costs because it was the only place that brought her and Benjamin together. She had arrived earlier that morning, placed a white rose, his favorite flower, on the table, and whispered to herself, "Happy anniversary, my love." But now, with Richard's stern words piercing the air, her heart felt like it was breaking again. Elon, who had originally come to the cafe to find some peace from the corporate chaos, was frozen in his seat when he saw Eleanor's dignified but anguished expression. It made him think of his own mother, Mae Musk, and how she had struggled to make ends meet when he was a child. Seeing Eleanor treated so disrespectfully stirred something fierce inside of him. Richard was unaware that his actions were about to start a series of events that would alter not only Eleanor's life but also the cafe itself. Elon gently put down his cup and stood up, staring at Richard with his piercing blue eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but a young barista interrupted. No older than 22, Sarah Johnson came forward first. "Mr. Grayson, you can't treat her like this," she pleaded, her voice faltering but resolute. Eleanor looked up at Sarah, who had tears in her eyes. "It's okay, sweetie, I don't want any problems," she said, but the barista shook her head, saying, "No, it's not okay." The tension in the room was evident, and other patrons started to notice some uncomfortable moving. Eleanor wasn't prepared for what would happen next, even though others took out their phones to record the scene as it was happening. When Elon Musk moved forward, his customary air of confidence was replaced with quiet intensity. "Excuse me," he began in a low but powerful voice, and the cafe went silent as all eyes turned to him. Richard scowled and did not immediately recognize him. "What's wrong with you? This is my cafe." Richard became defensive. Elon ignored him and turned to face Eleanor. "Ma'am," he said, softening his tone. "Would you like to sit with me?" The elderly woman blinked in surprise, not knowing how to react. She didn't know who this tall, modest man was, but something about his kind tone gave her a sense of security. "I don't want to cause any trouble," she said, her voice trembling. "You deserve to be here just as much as anyone else," Elon reassured her. The room grew colder as Elon's eyes locked onto Richard's. "I'm someone who knows that dignity and respect cost nothing," he said firmly, adding, "and I'll happily pay for anything she wants." Richard laughed bitterly, still not knowing who Elon was or who had the right to decide that she could leave if she wasn't buying anything. He took a stylish black credit card out of his pocket and gave it to Sarah, the young barista, saying, "Anything she wants, it's on me." Eleanor's voice broke as she murmured, "You don't have to do this," her lips quivering as she attempted to comprehend what was occurring. "Since my mother taught me that kindness is the greatest wealth someone can possess at that time," Elon's response was unshakable. Sarah let out an audible gasp as she looked down at the credit card's name. Richard's face went pale as the weight of his actions began to dawn on him. "Wait, Mr. Musk, I didn't know you were here." He stutteringly said, "I didn't know you were here." The cafe erupted into hushed whispers as people realized who had been sitting among them all along. Elon pulled out the chair across from Eleanor and motioned for her to sit down. "Please tell me about him," he said softly. "About who?" Eleanor asked, her voice cracking. "The man you're thinking of," Elon said, looking at the white rose on the table, and Eleanor, with tears in her eyes, sank into the chair while clutching the flower tightly. Benjamin paused her speech, saying, "But now that he's gone, all I have left are the memories." She whispered to her husband that this was our location, and that every year on our anniversary he would take me here. We would sit by this window and fantasize about all the things we do together. Elon listened carefully, his face softening with each sentence. "He must have been a remarkable man. We met at a Selma march when he stood up for me in front of a police officer, despite the fact that he hardly knew me." Eleanor grinned through her tears because he believed in kindness and love, in sticking up for what's right. Even Richard, who had been so heartless moments before, looked down with shame as Eleanor's comments filled the room with silence, and her love and pain were evident. "You're here today because you carry his love with you, and I believe he'd be proud of you for paying tribute to his memory in this way," Elon said, leaning forward and speaking steadily. Eleanor nodded and shook her hand as she reached for her cup. "Thank you," she said, "for noticing me when others weren't there." When Sarah returned with a tray of hot tea and pastries, her eyes were red from fighting back tears. "This is on the house," she said, setting the tray in front of Eleanor, who glanced up with her eyes beaming with gratitude. "Thank you, dear," she said quietly. Elon leaned back and looked out the window, but he wasn't done by any means. Something about the story of Eleanor. Richard stood frozen, watching helplessly as the cafe he believed he controlled slipped out of his grasp, but even he was unable to foresee what was going to happen next. The love she carried and the injustice she faced ignited a fire inside him, and he silently promised himself that he wouldn't let this moment fade into just another story. Elon leaned forward and looked at Richard with unwavering, steady eyes. "You owe this woman an apology," he said in a tone that left no room for debate. Richard stumbled, his haughtiness giving way to obvious discomfort. The cafe was strangely quiet as Elon's remarks pressed down on everyone. "I didn't want to offend you, but you did," interrupt her firmly, condemn her, and show her disdain loudly in front of everyone. "You owe her dignity, and if you can't give it, you owe her your absence." Richard's face flushed as he started to argue, but the other patrons muttering interrupted him. A voice said, "Hey, right," and then others quickly apologized. Richard glanced at Eleanor, his gaze flitting anxiously between her and Elon. "I'm sorry," he whispered, scarcely audible above a whisper. "It's not me, you need to apologize to him," she answered quietly, looking up at him with quiet strength. "You are to blame for losing sight of what kindness is." Richard winced as her statement hit a chord he hadn't anticipated, and without saying further word, he left Sarah and the other employees to manage the crowd. Elon went back to Eleanor, his face softening once more. Gently, he inquired how long it had been since his passing. 3 years. Benjamin always believed in the power of love and forgiveness, so Eleanor said, but it feels like yesterday. He would have advised me to let this go. Eleanor looked toward the back room where Richard had vanished, her eyes compassionate but exhausted. Perhaps he was right, but it still hurts. Elon nodded, his eyes momentarily becoming emotional. There are days when the sadness is as fresh as the first time I lost someone I love, but I keep going by reminding myself that their love is still present in everything they taught us and all they stood for. Eleanor replied, "You're a good man," as she reached across the table and delicately caressed his palm. Elon shook his head and said, "I'm just trying to learn how to be." However, Sarah interrupted him by coming back with a small packet. Mrs. Davis spoke in a shaky voice. "When I opened the envelope, I discovered a hand-drawn picture of a couple sitting by the window with the words, 'Love never dies.' I didn't know your spouse had any connection to this location, but now that I do, I want you to have this." She held the sketch to her bosom and said, "Thank you," as tears fell down her cheeks beneath the lovely cursive lettering. "If you ever need anything, a ride home, a friend, you call this number, no strings attached," Elon continued, standing tall and projecting a long shadow over Mrs. Davis. He then took a business card out of his wallet and gave it to her. I don't know how to thank you, Eleanor murmured, looking at the card with tears clouding her vision. You already have. Elon grinned and responded by reminding everyone what truly matters. As Eleanor finished her tea, the cafe started to bustle once more as patrons who had watched the scene silently approached her with offers of assistance and even paid for her transportation home. Elon turned to go, but stopped at the door, looking back at the cafe and then at Sarah. You're in charge now, he said, raising his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, and Sarah's eyes widened. I just bought the place. Elon mentioned in passing that the paperwork would be resolved tomorrow, but for now, here is your cafe. Elon felt lighter as he walked out into the crisp New York air. He didn't need the cafe or the recognition, but he needed the reminder that love and kindness were the greatest legacies anyone could leave behind and inside. Run it with kindness and you'll honor Mrs. Davis and everyone like her. The room erupted in applause, and Eleanor's heart swelled with gratitude. She looked at the man who had stepped in when no one else would, and for the first time in years, she felt hopeful. Eleanor, Harbor Bruce. The story of that day would be told and retold not because a billionaire made headlines but because an elderly widow taught everyone that love never truly dies, it only transforms. She sat by the window, her heart full, holding a white rose for the first time since Benjamin's death, and she smiled through her tears, knowing that his love was still guiding her as it always would.